Hey guys, I'm Heidi Priebe. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time here. Today we are talking about a term that I call self-neutrality. So I want to be clear from the get-go, if you Google the word self-neutrality, I think you get about 25 different definitions of it. And in this video, I will be referencing absolutely no external definitions of this term. In this video, I will just be using it to describe a particular frame of reference that I like to turn to when I'm struggling with the concept of self-love. So if you are on any type of journey when it comes to your self-identity, your self-concept, your attachment style, whatever it is, something most of us hear very frequently is that we need to love ourselves. And while that is a wonderful sentiment, and I truly believe it is a very achievable end goal for almost anyone, there are a lot of steps in between where most of us are starting and self-love. I remember years ago when I started doing this work, I would hear that all the time, like love yourself, accept yourself. And I would just go, okay, but how? Like, what does that mean? And so at the time, I developed what was a middle ground for myself that I think could be helpful for a lot of people, which is the concept of self-neutrality. Now, in order to understand what self-neutrality is, I'm first going to explain what it is not. Those of us who grew up with either fairly significant insecure attachment patterning, so that means patterns of thought and behavior that rest on the assumption that some part of one's own authentic experience of the self is shameful, wrong, or bad, and needs to be hidden, distorted, or done away with in order to stay in relationship with others. Or anyone who, for whatever reason, developed a shame-bound identity. So last week I put out a video called Toxic Shame, what it is and how to heal from it, which I will link in the description of this video. And to have a shame-bound identity or to be insecurely attached, in my opinion, are kind of two different terms for the same thing. But in any case, what I'm getting at here is that if, for whatever reason, you developed the belief about yourself that there is something wrong with you, that you are flawed or broken or not like other people at your core, you are likely struggling with what someone like John Bradshaw, who is a brilliant shame researcher, would call a shame-bound identity. So the belief that something about the real you has something deeply wrong with it. Now, the problem is if you develop a shame-bound identity, that belief that something is intrinsically wrong with you, it becomes very difficult to function in the world. We need a sense of self-esteem and a sense of self-worth, even if it is contrived and inauthentic, in order to keep ourselves psychologically well enough to remain alive. So to balance out that sense of extreme shame, we have to develop compensatory mechanisms for making ourselves feel okay. Those might look like developing an ego self. So thinking of ourselves as particularly cool, interesting, better than other people, more intellectual, more intelligent, whatever it is that allows us to distance ourselves from that feeling of shame that we have at our core. Or it can mean developing an ego around how pure and innocent and good you are and how you have never done anything to hurt anybody else. And if something goes wrong in your relationships, it must be the other person because you have perfectly pure intentions. Or it could look like leaning into what you believe is your inner badness and developing a persona about how rebellious and different you are. Whatever it is, there needs to be something that is equally inauthentic to your core self that you use to balance out those feelings of shame. It is a natural survival response. And for some of us, it can even just be sitting in that kind of shameful view of ourselves, but constantly dissociating into fantasies of a future where we are better than we are now, where we are richer or better looking or more charismatic or more interesting, or we've achieved more and everybody loves us. And we can spend our entire lives caught up in those fantasies of a magical future where things are different. And for some of us, personal development and trying to get ourselves closer and closer to that future ideal can become somewhat of an addiction in and of itself. The problem is that we aren't ever really getting closer to solving the problem the more we build up our ego. So the more we think of ourselves as better than everybody else, and actually the reason why other people didn't understand us when we were young, or we weren't accepted when we were young, is just because all of these characteristics we have, whether it's us being the coolest, most intellectual person in the world, or the kindest, most pure, empathic person in the world, or the world's biggest underdog, whatever it is, the more we convince ourselves that those things are our true identity, the more we actually get away from what we need to do in order to properly heal. In order to properly heal, we need to feel and learn to integrate that shame that is at our core. It will not go away if we just try to run from it. We cannot personal develop our way out of it. We cannot date our way out of it. We cannot succeed our way out of it. We have to find a way to eventually grapple with the shame that we feel at our core and work through it until we realize it is not the truth about who we are. And only then are we going to be able to get back in touch with our authentic selves and start living in a more aligned, authentic, and relaxed way, where we are no longer running from that shame that governs everything we do. And for myself, I found embracing the principle of self-neutrality to be a wonderful middle step between that toxic shame that I was constantly in my early life trying to offset through personal development, and the idea of complete and total self-love and acceptance, which, when I was starting this journey, felt completely and totally out of reach. So what I call self-neutrality, in a nutshell, is simply allowing oneself to entertain the idea that you are exactly like everybody else at your core. You are neither exceptional nor inherently shameful relative to other people. In fact, you are just like everybody else, and the ways in which you differ from other people are a product of your experiences, not a product of you just having magically received a bad, broken soul. So personally, it blew my mind when I finally realized that healing my self-esteem was not going to be a matter of finally finding a way to be more successful, attractive, competent, independent, interesting than everybody else. For those who lean more anxious, it might blow your mind to realize that your self-esteem is not ever going to heal through having the perfect relationship with somebody else. Our self-esteem heals when we finally accept that everything we are feeling is a normal thing to feel. If we are having extreme emotional reactions, it is because our early experiences shaped our patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving in a specific way that necessitated that later response. And anybody born in our exact shoes, going through our exact experiences in life, in the bodies that we were born in, would have developed the exact same responses. So if we have this massive chasm between toxic shame and idealistic ego beliefs about the self, in the middle we have the ground of self-neutrality, where we can entertain the idea that we are not, in fact, inherently worse or inherently better than anybody else. We are perfectly ordinary. This doesn't mean we're not interesting. It doesn't mean there's not lots about us that other people might be thrilled to get to know about one day. But what it means is that the substance of our souls is not different than anybody else's. The ways in which we're different from other people can all be explained through past experiences and the ways in which we have developed around those experiences. And the more you can hold yourself in this space in the healing process, the more clearly you're going to be able to see your own life. The more clearly you're able to see your own life, the more you're able to have compassion for yourself and empathy in the healing process. And that becomes a massive precursor to developing self-love. So for the rest of this video, we are going to talk about how to practice self-neutrality and eventually start planting the seeds for true embodied love of the self to grow in its place. There's a quote that I love so much that I cannot remember the attribution for or seem to find on Google, but it goes, "Love is at the root of understanding. Understanding is at the root of love." And what that quote means to me is that if we really stay with anything, if we really stay present with another person, with ourselves with a particular line of reasoning, we will eventually understand it enough that we find it impossible to not align ourselves with it. We eventually understand that a certain person could not be any way other than the way that they are based on what they've been through. Or we understand that a sequence of events could not possibly have turned out differently than it did based on everything that happened leading up to it. And when we arrive at that place, we are aligning ourselves with reality. And when we are aligned with reality, it is almost impossible not to feel empathetic about everything that is happening because we have arrived at a place of true, deep understanding. Understanding is at the root of love. Love is at the root of understanding. When we are able to understand ourselves that deeply, empathy for ourselves and love for ourselves naturally begins to flow out of that. So the first step in this process of practicing self-neutrality is to become curious about our own emotional responses. So instead of shaming ourselves for the things that we don't want to feel, and for everyone that's going to be something different, we can get really curious with ourselves about why a person, whether it's us or someone else, would possibly be feeling that thing. Why would a person, whether it's ourselves or someone else, behave in the ways that we have behaved over the course of our lives that maybe we don't like or aren't proud of? So whenever I'm struggling to understand a particular piece of my own psychology or a pattern of behavior that I'm frustrated with, I try to take a step back and go, if someone were born as a completely blank slate, they had no thoughts, feelings, opinions, they had no particular inclinations of any sort, what would happen to them in life that would lead them to a place where they were behaving in this way that I am behaving? What might happen to a person that would cause that? And at this point, you might need to do some self-educating. So there was about a year and a half where all I did was read psychology books and try to figure out which types of things influence which types of behavior patterns, thought patterns, emotional patterns happening. I did an entire degree in attachment theory trying to figure this out. And while that is obviously a little bit excessive for most people, it's extraordinarily helpful to start developing an understanding of what causes people to behave in the ways in which they behave from a detached, non-judgmental mindset. The more you can look at your own behavior through such a lens with non-judgmental curiosity, the more you're going to start to understand why you're doing what you're doing, including why you're doing things you're doing that you wish you would stop doing, but maybe can't seem to find a way to stop. The goal here is not to change any of your behavior. It's simply to change your mindset from one of judgment to one of curiosity and openness to understanding. So at this point, you're thinking of yourself less as a person and more of a science experiment, and that is totally okay. It takes the pressure off. It allows you to just be curious and observant of your own patterns of behavior and thinking and feeling, and develop some sort of language for why you are thinking, feeling, and behaving the way that you are. Because if you do not, in fact, have a broken soul, and if you are not, in fact, inherently flawed, broken, and bad, there must be an explanation for whatever has been going on for you. Step 2, and for some people, this is going to be much easier than step 1. For some people, it is going to be infinitely harder, is start applying the same type of reasoning to everybody else. Now, I do not suggest being open, curious, and non-judgmental of others because I think it is the moral thing to do. I do think it's the moral thing to do, but I also don't really care about that. I suggest being curious, open, and non-judgmental of others because it is the effective thing to do when it comes to developing a healthier relationship with yourself. Now, why would applying this open, non-judgmental reasoning towards other people, including people who have treated you terribly, be good for your own sense of self-esteem? When we are enmeshed with other people, when we do not know where we end and someone else begins, it becomes very easy to take things extremely personally all the time. If I believe that in every interaction where one person is getting treated badly, there must be a good person and a bad person, I will spend much of my life preoccupied with trying to figure out who's good and who's bad. And that preoccupation will rob me of much of the good that life has to offer. The way out of this game is to decide that nobody is inherently bad. Now, does that mean that there are no people who are behaving harmfully? Absolutely not. Does that mean that everybody is trustworthy? Absolutely not. Does that mean we should never protect ourselves? Absolutely not. You're getting the picture here. What it means is that you do not get to selectively play this game. Either there are no inherently bad people or there are. If you are living with a worldview that there are people who are just inherently bad, broken, flawed in their souls, you are going to find a way on one of your bad days to convince yourself that you are one of those people. The only way out of this game is to decide that there are no such people. In order to decide that, it means you have to give up your villain stories about other people. This does not mean you have to like, respect, or put up with bad treatment from other people. All it means is you have to be willing to consider the possibility that when someone else is treating you badly, it does not have all that much to do with you. And they are treating you that way because they too are a product of their experiences, just like you are a product of yours. Understanding that under the right circumstances, and by the right circumstances I mean the most dreadful possible circumstances imaginable, everybody exhibits trauma responses, and some of those trauma responses lead to very bad behavior that harms other people, allows us to understand that we too are not immune to that. And it also kind of frees us from taking things personally. When we understand that other people who behave badly towards us are offloading their own shame instead of integrating it internally, that feels a lot better than believing that they're treating us that way because we are wretched, terrible, shameful people who deserve bad treatment, right? So we definitely need to have and maintain boundaries around those who behave unkindly or disrespectfully towards us, but we can do that while accepting that they, just like us, are a product of their experiences. And the only person we can really control is ourselves. And so that's who we're going to focus our energy on. So step 3, when it comes to developing a thought pattern that is based around self-neutrality, I'm going to recommend, if you really struggle with the concept, that there is not something wrong with you. Picture yourself walking past a playground that has very young children in it, children who are 2 or 3 years old, and ask yourself, which one of these kids do not deserve care and protection and guidance as they go through life? Almost all adults are going to instinctually answer, all of these children deserve that thing. The odd adult is not going to answer that. And that adult is almost always going to be the one who blames themselves for their own early abuse, neglect, rejection, whatever it was. But I guarantee you, if you are watching this and you believe that every child out there deserves care, protection, respect, and guidance from loving adults, but you did not, you were the exception, you were just the kid that was so bad and so flawed that you deserve everything that happened to you, I am going to tell you right now, you are not the exception to this rule. How do I know that? I know that because there is not an exception to this rule. You are not special enough to be the only exception to it. What you are doing when you are telling yourself you're the exception to this rule is you are projecting your adult reasoning abilities onto your younger self. When you were that age, you did not know what you know now. You did not have the emotional regulation skills that you have now. You did not have the logical reasoning skills that you have now. You did not have the capacity to understand what you would have needed to understand in order to develop differently. How do you know that's true? Because it's true of everybody. Children do not have the skills adults have to reason the way adults reason. However, from a very young age, some children experience what the psychologist John Bradshaw calls a broken will. Your will, as defined by Bradshaw, is the part of yourself that believes consciously that you are inherently worthy of care and respect. Children's wills often get broken when they have shame offloaded onto them by adults who need the children to behave in a certain way in order for them, the adults, to stay regulated. This does not mean the adult is an inherently evil, corrupt person. In large part, these are just adults who are behaving unconsciously and not aware of how their own patterning is affecting others. But when children become responsible for the emotional well-being of their caregivers, overtly or covertly, the part of their minds that inherently knows that they are worthy of care, respect, guidance, exactly as they are, gets broken. And when our will gets broken like that, we stop believing that we deserve those things. We stop believing that there is any goodness in us to access. But we are always wrong if that is what we believe. No child comes into this world inherently broken. No child is the exception, ergo, you are not the exception. Now, the next thing I'm going to recommend in rejigging your worldview a little bit to move away from that toxic shame, idealized self ricocheting and land in the middle in self-neutrality is refuse to engage in magical thinking. And this is not an easy suggestion. When we live in a state of toxic shame, fantasies, whether those are romantic fantasies, fantasies about breaking generational cycles and healing the entire world, fantasies about the kind of person we want to become and all the impressive things we want to do in the world, these can become very powerful addictions because we can use them to self-regulate and keep ourselves emotionally balanced. So it is not easy to wake up one morning and stop fantasizing about a magical future where everything is different and we never feel shame again. However, the more we can limit ourselves for reaching for these fantasies in the moments that we access our shame, the more we can learn to be present with that shame and start to make friends with it. A different relief from the suffering that is inherent to accessing a sense of toxic shame is stepping into observer mode. Going, I'm going to approach this from a self-neutral place and just ask myself questions, be curious with myself about why it is that I'm feeling what I'm feeling right now. And the more we can begin to step into that observer mode and start to coach ourselves through these moments where we feel that shame, the better a relationship we develop with what's underneath that shame, which is our authentic selves and our actual wants, beliefs, curiosities about the world that we have shoved down for most of our lives. But in order to get there, we have to detach from these fantasy versions of ourselves and make the commitment to ourselves to stay present and to work with our actual entire selves as we exist in the present moment. And the more we're able to do this from a self-neutral place, the more we're going to find that there are a lot of things we actually kind of like about ourselves, and that it kind of sucks that we spent our lives denying because we have some really cool traits. But to get in touch with those traits, we have to stop dissociating into a fantasy where we are a completely different person than the one we are now. So in the next point, I'm going to reiterate, we need to find a way to consistently observe our emotional experiences without shaming ourselves for them. Because for self-love and self-esteem to develop, it takes a couple of things. An acceptance that you are normal is the first and foremost thing. So you are no less human than anybody else. You do not need to be ashamed of the quality of your soul. But you also need to accept that you are not made of exceptional human qualities. Despite the fact that you might have many good and interesting qualities that you've spent a lot of your life intentionally nurturing. But when it comes to who you are just like everybody else. As the saying goes, at the end of the game, the king and the pawn go back into the same box, and the reason they go back into the same box is because they are made of the same material. But the more that you can truly grasp and absorb that concept, the more you can begin to understand the utility of all of your emotions, instead of constantly trying to manipulate your own emotions because you feel shame around them. Every feeling we have is important, and it is telling us something about the nature of reality and our lives. And the more we can listen to those emotions, the more we get in touch with the world as it actually exists. The more we stay in touch with reality as it actually exists, the less moments of disconnection we experience. And the less moments of disconnection we experience, the less shame we feel. So this is an upward spiral, because the better we are able to assess ourselves and other people accurately, the more connection that is authentic we are able to have. And the more authentic connection we have, the less shame we feel about ourselves. And the more we take on this process, the more feedback we get from ourselves and other people about the normalcy of our emotions. Everybody feels angry sometimes. Everybody feels sexual attraction sometimes. Everybody feels embarrassed, nervous, stupid, dysregulated sometimes. And actually, the fact that we feel all that stuff is what connects us to other people, not the other way around. And once you can accept the normalcy of the entire range of your emotions, you start to lift yourself slowly out of that sense of toxic shame that you've been cloaked in your entire life. But we have to master this idea of self-neutrality before we can move into self-love, because self-neutrality gives us a sense of humility. And in order to have true self-esteem, we need to be humble enough to understand that we are not inherently different than anybody else. Everything about us is normal. Ergo, the traits that we want to develop and work on inside of ourselves, when we get there, will be the product of having put in really hard work. And then we can be truly proud of ourselves because we aren't just running away from this bad feeling. We are starting from a place of neutrality and building upon it in a positive way. And most importantly, we are observing ourselves accurately. When we are observing ourselves accurately, we are in the I'm okay, you're okay worldview that is inherent to those who have secure attachment styles. So if someone is rude to us, if someone behaves poorly towards us, it doesn't impact the way we think about ourselves, though it may impact the way that we interact with that person going forward. If we make a mistake, we don't have to think, I am a mistake and there is something inherently flawed about me. We go, I made a mistake because I was necessarily missing information. How do I go find the information I need to correct the mistake and proceed differently going forward? Which again is what it feels like to be centered in that I'm okay, you're okay worldview. It doesn't mean I'm exceptional and perfect and do everything right. It means I am just like everybody else, which means when I mess up, there is a way to fix it. And anyone in my exact shoes would have messed up in the exact same ways. It's not ever that personal to me. The more we embrace self-neutrality, the more we feel comfortable reaching out for help, asking questions when we don't understand something, holding space for other people to make mistakes without making it about us. And the more we can do all of this, the more we slowly transform ourselves into someone that we deeply respect. And self-respect is the absolute seed of self-love, and everything that we grow to love about ourselves is going to blossom out of developing that base sense of self-respect. All right, that's all I have to say for today on the concept of self-neutrality. As always, let me know your thoughts, opinions, questions in the comments section. I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you back here again really soon.